I have to admit, I have a little bit of a beef with science fiction series these days that are often written by people who have no idea about science, only about fiction. And so it's more like space-themed fantasy has become what people call science fiction. If you go back to the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, most of the best science fiction was written by engineers. It was written by scientists. It was written by people who deeply understood this stuff.
I'm sure I'm not the only one who feels like dystopian future described in a lot of science fiction stories and novels of the past struggles to induce dread or even sound scary these days. We successfully surpassed some of the grim predictions. But what they're still good at is predicting certain aspects of our existence and shed light on the clockwork of our society and its politics. Within the brewing pot of lawless underbellies, a new ideology might be forming. And it doesn't go unnoticed, because it never does. There's your bright side. Imagine yourself a peaceful megastructure of an apartment complex that has its own rich neighborhoods and slums. You're just one elevator ride away. Bicycle Repairman takes place in one such building, and its themes are both naively rebellious and jaded in a wonderfully poetic way. Also, the central idea aged perfectly. Both of them, actually. This one earned a Hugo, and rightly so. And if you somehow missed this Bruce Sterling gem, I kinda envy you, because I'd love to read it for the very first time again. I was lucky enough to come across it on its 1999 re-release, and trust me, at the time, it was completely mind-blowing. Tell me if any of this feels relevant today. Free market, government influence, gerontocracy, rogue AI, blunt political commentary, pharmaceutical enhancement, VR use. Yeah. And Bicycle Repairman manages to tie it all together in such a pretty bow that you can't help but admire it. And it's also perfectly paced, well written, and keeps the old hook of what's gonna happen next shiny and glinting. So even though the algorithm will punish me for it, if you can't wait to get to reading it right away, I won't keep you any longer. Its only shortcoming is that it's short. Yeah, that was terrible, and I am sorry. In the enticing traditions of Philip K. Dick's Faith of Our Fathers, Sterling keeps the world building vague enough for our imagination to run wild by dropping subtle yet powerful hints on the current situation and climate around Lyle. It takes place in the not-so-distant future of 2037. Can you believe it's now closer than the time the story was written? Kinda freaks you out, doesn't it? And for those of you who weren't around back then, don't worry, I'm sure a decade as awkward and glorious as the 90s will come around again. And you'll get the same feeling when you'll realize it's been long gone. But hey, it was good while it lasted. What also feels reassuring is that our protagonist seems so well off in the chaos surrounding him. Every little aspect, every tiny detail has been thought and taken care of. Lyle ain't some thug or a cool assassin or even a street kid who made his way. He's just plain smart and well connected. Lyle's also in demand, because he loves his simple craft of fixing bikes. Chattanooga's high-rise has an anarchy zone, and Lyle Schweik is at home in its bowels. This feels cozy already, am I right? His former roommate Eddie DeTruzes left a while ago, but he's still somewhat in touch, meaning he's using Lyle's mobile sanctuary as his mailbox. Now when I say mobile, I mean the whole thing is suspended on elevator cables and can be lifted off its supports to become an oversized birdcage for an oversized bird. Eddie is no longer a Zood, which is a zone dude. He's somewhere in Europe, living out his VR romance spilled into real life and enjoying all the twists and turns as well as ups and downs of life dipped in politics. And it's not entirely unfamiliar ground for him, because he used to be a prominent figure in the Chattanooga zone too. And Lyle just doesn't mind an occasional parcel. He might not be a wise street urchin, but he's sharp as a scalpel. His immediate situation assessment is cautious, precise, and forward-thinking, which might come in handy pretty soon. because he's about to be tied up in a rather hectic set of circumstances that, besides affecting his future, will tell us a somewhat bright-eyed story of how our society works and the challenges we all might be facing soon. Yeah, it looks like we're all gonna be in for it. All those latest poorly disguised social experiments don't inspire much hope in me personally, but despite all its sins and revolting debauchery, humanity's good side seems to persevere. This resilience is in the spotlight in The Bicycle Repairman. Some of the tech described is already within the hand's reach. How long before we have MOOCs, which is personal AI assistants to run errands for us online and place and receive calls in our place? Jensen calls them agents. What makes the whole picture lived in and believable are the details, of course. Sterling does an incredible job of imagining for us what life would be like if this tech was readily available, and to such an extent that you can just feel the annoyance and the irresistible trap of convenience at the same time. Perfect. There's a warning here. Like Herbert, who tried to warn us about the dangers of the Messiah cult, the same applies to Sterling shining a bright light on AI being capable of impersonating people up to actively replacing them. Now, unfortunately, this might be more than okay for some of us. It's fine if they just want to talk to their nan, but what if it's a person of power and influence? What if you're not even sure who's in control anymore? What impresses me most is the restraint the author has against just going straight for conscious AI, instead just implying that self-awareness is completely beside the point here, although not entirely ruled out. And the juxtaposition of a physical, comprehensible object like a bicycle versus something ethereal like a cloud service is wonderful. You press a button and somewhere something really complicated happens. That's far less satisfying than this wheel was busted and now it ain't. And it's something increasingly difficult to experience in a technologically sophisticated civilizations. Yeah, cyberspace, very impressive. Now, could you hand me that wrench? A rebellion in the form of I want to mend things despite the fact that I don't need to. You could probably explain to Sterling why a teak floppy drive is worth preserving when perfectly functional modern storage exists. And he'd probably empathize. The absence of difficulty is terrifying. The freedom to choose your difficulties, on the other hand, is amazing. And if you value effort, an effortless world is just oppressive. When we look back at the 90s, out of all the things we had in common with that era, one stands out. That rapid growth of a certain technology. Computers were becoming obsolete as soon as you were done setting them up. What was the latest and greatest became adorably sad in a blink of an eye. And that pace, it made the imaginations run wild. If my shiny new PC turned into a potato this fast, what's it gonna be like in 20 more years? What about 50? Humans are surprisingly capable of being prophetic sometimes. And the concept of status is ever present. I care enough to know how this thing works. Therefore, I can do something difficult that you cannot. The underlying hierarchy will always be there. A person who builds a mechanical keyboard from obscure 80s switches or restoring a 60s car, they're not solving the global shortage. They're demonstrating. Peacocking. Who are you? What do you do? You may be strong and powerful, but you still need me. Yes, Bruce, we all saw it. You can put the neon arrows down now. But for the love of God, just keep going. The socioeconomic machinery of Sterling's world is slightly too free-for-all and chaotic to be realistic in my taste, but it's fun and exciting anyway. Manufacturing is fantastically capable, information is abundant. If hunger, housing, transportation, clothing, etc. are no longer compelling reasons to participate in an economy, the human desire to be useful is not going anywhere. Some will write poetry and play golf, others might want to fix bicycles. The obvious elephant in the room here is the question of greed and ownership on the larger scale. Somebody owns all those robots and plants. Someone maintains the net and the power grid. Everything and everyone depends on them. Wouldn't they be the ones calling the shots, even if indirectly? Material abundance doesn't automatically mean egalitarian abundance, unfortunately. There's also this harrowing premonition of an unnatural outlook on the sex drive and the role of attraction and relationships in the years to come. We can already see hints of that happening. Whether it's something that's just a side product of progress or maybe even something sinister at play, the outtake is not looking promising. There's always a side to pick. Will you be pragmatic or stick to your beliefs? So what does Sterling teach us here? Well, quite a lot actually. This short story serves as a great manual to life for a young man. No, seriously. Lesson 1. Have good friends and be beneficial to each other. Duh. Lesson 2. Keep your home and your stuff protected as best you can. Physically isolate it if you have to. Lesson 3. Own some means to protect yourself. You may keep it in the open, but make the actual access to it tricky. People will try and take your stuff away from you. And speaking of things, lesson 4. Find some time to set all the tech aside and be physical with the world. Touch the proverbial grass, so to speak. Lesson 5 is as old as time. Things are not always what they seem to be at the first glance. And love your mom, that's a given. No revelations? I guess, but they're easier said than done. Non-learning computational model for neural networks was a concept as early as the 40s. Object and pattern detection was just the start. Then came the learning paradigm. So a rogue AI is not too outlandish of an idea in the 90s. In fact, it was a thought that haunted a few creative minds. It's just that the specifics are vastly different. Fear-mongering is the easiest. Being rational and level-headed about a wild subject like the potential of artificial intelligence is tricky. And to be optimistic about it feels like an art form in itself. I mean, when the people developing them aren't even sure themselves? Holy semiconductors, Batman. But the saddest thing to me personally is that the net is still a free environment in the bicycle repairman. I'm old enough to be nostalgic about the good old days of the internet. The days when it felt like a place where you could roam free, where your imagination was the only limiting factor, where everyone could explore, connect, and share without any reservations. Any reservations. It had its downsides, sure, but what we have today is just pathetic. As soon as things go mainstream, the charm goes. I'd much rather touch grass. The plot is just begging to be turned into an episode of Love, Death plus Robots, like two other of the Sterling stories. My only fear is that some ambitious screenwriter would try and turn it into a feature film by stretching it and adding ridiculous subplots and unnecessary characters. In that case, I'd rather have nothing. But it's definitely not Blood Meridian. It 100% can be turned into a short film. I can just see it in my head right now. So the purpose of eliminating pointless work isn't to eliminate work. It's to make more meaningful work possible. If you crave this much more optimistic vision of technological progress than the usual sci-fi treatment, you'll enjoy The Bicycle Repairman as much as I did.